go ahead and get started. So as a reminder, we are recording today's webinar and it will be available on the CTS Unpacking Freight website as well as the presentations from today. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gina Boss, the Deputy Director for the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the 5th webinar in our Freight 101 series. So this series has launched our center's 2025 theme, Unpacking Freight. And during this calendar year, we are seeking to create a better understanding among transportation professionals and others, including policymakers and the general public, about the critical role that moving freight plays in the economy and in our daily lives. So before I introduce today's speakers, I wanted to briefly mention a couple of other events for your consideration that will be happening in May. So first, on May 6th, CTS will be hosting an in-person discussion prior to our annual meeting and awards luncheon. There's the information there. So the event will feature presentations from Kristen White with Google Public Sector, Alireza Khani, an associate professor in transportation engineering from the University of Minnesota, and Dylan Freed from the city of Minneapolis. And you can either use this QR code or just go directly to the website to get more information and to sign up for the event. So then also on May 8th, our next webinar in this series will be focused on urban freight delivery and logistics, and will feature Ari Silke, the general manager for Amazon Freight. So now on to today's webinar. So as you think of questions for today's speakers, please post them in the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar, and we will address the questions once both of our speakers have had a chance to complete their remarks. So today's webinar focuses on trucking, the mode that drives, pun intended, the movement of goods in Minnesota and beyond. And we are pleased to have two leaders in this area with us today. With more than 30 years of experience in a broad range of transportation fields, Dan Murray currently serves as Senior Vice President for the American Transportation Research Institute. And Dan will share more with you about what ATRI is. He is responsible for managing ATRI's transportation research, testing, and evaluation, and leads multiple national activities, including the US DOT-sponsored Freight Mobility Initiative. And Dan is also a longtime member of Minnesota's Freight Advisory Committee. Sam Anderson serves as CEO of Bay & Bay, a full-service logistics and refrigerated trucking company based in Minnesota. Since assuming the CE role in 2010, Sam is credited with reinventing the company and its culture. He has led a transformation from a family trucking company to one of the top 10 refrigerated trucking and logistics companies in the U.S. And Sam also currently serves as chair of the Minnesota Trucking Association. So looking forward to hearing both of their presentations. And Dan, I will turn things over to you.
Well, thank you much, Gina. I will boot things up right now. Glad to be here, everyone. Trucking is an exciting industry. Unfortunately, it's a gargantuan industry, and so I'm going to try to get through 2,000 slides in 20 minutes. One, because I'm a big believer in death by PowerPoint, and two, because Gina gave me 20 minutes to talk about the largest freight mode in the world. First of all, a couple slides on ATRI, an infomercial of sorts. Then I'm going to talk about trucking industry economics. And then, of course, I'll wrap up and turn it over to Sam, who's much more interesting in that world. So ATRI is a 501c3 not-for-profit research arm of the trucking industry. All of our research is available at no cost on our website. If you go to our website at truckingresearch.org, you can sign up to our contact database, and we push all of our research out, again, free of charge. I have a board of directors made up of presidents and CEOs and some chairmen of these companies. Certainly, a number of them should be clear to you. These folks are not on the webinar with us today, so I'm going to tell you this group is equally important to ATRI and its research process. Our research advisory committee includes representatives of the federal government, state government, motor carriers, industry suppliers, driver groups, law enforcement, academics. little bit like herding cats. They get together virtually several times a year, but always face to face in March to discuss issues in trucking and what research might address those issues, in some cases mitigate the issues. So this is a very important group, and ATRI doesn't do research unless it's has the imprimatur of Iraq, as we call it. So many of the things I'll mention to you today in short order are ATRI priority projects. In some cases, we fund the research ourselves with charitable contributions. In other cases, we work with government agencies, whether that's MPO state or FHWA, FMCSA. We even have a 5-year contract with the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. So that's my infomercial. I'm going to talk a little bit about the true topic here, which is Trucking 101. The trucking industry, again, is the largest freight mode in the world. Here in the US, we move somewhere between 73% of cargo by volume, which is tonnage, up to nearly 80% of cargo by revenue. Rail share, we great friends in the railroad. In fact, the #1 revenue source for Class 1 railroads is the trucking industry through truck rail intermodalism. But rail share in general is going down slightly because of the loss of coal and the fact that coal plants are being converted to natural gas. Rail intermodal is always, quote unquote, the fastest growing mode. And that's because their share is just a hair over 3%. So it's not hard to obtain that sort of thing. But again, the trucking industry's share is growing. The more we move into e-commerce, the more you need that just-in-time last mile activity, which is going to involve a truck. May not be an 18-wheeler, but it'll be a commercial vehicle of some sort. It's a substantial employment sector in the economy. In the US, about 1 in 16 jobs are associated with the trucking industry in some fashion. Here in Minnesota, we're a bit more service-oriented than we are manufacturing, so the number is still substantial, but dropped slightly to 1 in 18 jobs. 65,000 trucking companies registered with US DOT as interstate trucking companies. Many of those, I'll tell you right now, are very small fleets or owner-operators, which brings me to this slide, which is an interesting game we play in trucking. There's no question we're a large industry of very small companies. Based on registrations, you'll see here that over 90% of all trucking companies in the US are 5 and fewer trucks. What's interesting, though, is when we need to, we can say the 100 largest trucking companies in the United States control 70% of the assets, the employees, the cargo moved, and the VMTs. In fact, FedEx and UPS together have 1.1 million employees. So you can see that, we are fragmented at a fleet and registration level, but there's no question the top 100 have a substantial role in the industry. I also want to point out in terms of nomenclature, something that's relatively important. There's a tendency for people outside of the trucking industry to say, well, it's privately owned or it's in the private sector, therefore it's a private fleet. In the world of trucking, a private fleet is 3M's own truck fleet, General Motors' own truck fleet, General Mills' own truck fleet, and the for-hire carriers, which would include a Bay & Bay, Schneider, Werner, you name it, those folks will sign contracts with hundreds, maybe thousands of customers to move hundreds, maybe thousands of different commodities. So that's the difference between private and for-hire. When you look at international activity, I wanted to throw this slide in mostly for 2 reasons. One, trucks move the majority of surface freight between Canada and Mexico, but what's not well known is a number of years back, not many ironically, our #1 trading partners all switched positions. Today, 2024, I should say, Mexico is #1, easily our largest trading partner, not China. Canada is now our #2 trading partner, not China. So the tariff activity, the trade war activity you see, a lot of it is focused on China, whereas Mexico and Canada, that is where the activity is today, and I think it'll stay that way for quite some time into the future. Let's talk about revenue and taxes. This is equally important. There's no question that an 80,000-pound truck will do more damage on the road than a Prius. But I want to point out that in terms of taxes, both Minnesota and federal, we do pay a substantial amount of revenue to the highway trust funds, nearly $1 in 3 comes from the trucking industry. So no question, there's debates everywhere about whether trucks pay their fair share, how much pavement damage occurs. I just wouldn't want you to think our contribution to the revenue base is inconsequential. Really quickly, every single year for almost 2 decades, we survey thousands and thousands of trucking companies, thousands of truck drivers, all kinds of stakeholders, and we come up with this annual sort of David Letterman top 10 list. Some of these issues float up and down across months and years. They're very acute. Fuel pricing can change in a quarter. Others are perennial issues. Driver shortage has been around for a couple decades. Insurance cost issues, a couple decades. Notice driver distraction, number 10. Ironically, the trucking industry's concern is with car driver distraction leading to more crashes between cars and trucks. What's really interesting is when you separate out truck drivers from motor carriers, what you'll see here, not so clearly, is while the economy is front and center these days right now, driver shortage on the carrier list had been number one for 4 years in a row. When the motor carriers say, what do we do about this driver shortage issue? We say, well, take a look at the truck driver list, because every one of those is a nail in the coffin. Truck parking has been the number one issue for truck drivers for the last 5 years. It's a showstopper in many regards. Big kudos to the Minnesota DOT. They just released this week an RFP to update their Minnesota truck parking study. So we're certainly, as an industry, excited about that. Now I'm going to talk about economics in trucking now. No question, the last few years have been ugly for trucking. In fact, since 2022, we have been in a recession for over 2 straight years. While the GDP, the US economy, is not in a recession, no question, the trucking industry has been recession, defined as 2 quarters or more of negative growth. When the larger fleets and the larger shippers interact, they typically set up contracts, dedicated trucks. They're reliable, but in the classic economy, the spot market is where smaller fleets and owner-operators like to play. It's volatile, but it's also a bit more lucrative. And then some fleets go back and forth between contract revenue and spot market revenue. I only want to point this out because the marketplace in trucking has taken a huge hit, spot market in particular. The good news is if you look at the tail in late 24, early 25, it looks like maybe we're turning the corner. I will tell you, though, this is pre-tariff, but it looked like we were turning the corner, whereas in the spot market, smaller folks and owner-operators not quite yet seen light at the end of the tunnel. I am an optimist. I think it'll do well. We as an industry will do well in 25, but we're not quite there yet. I also want to point out that when you compare this recession to other recessions, it's nothing like the Great Recession. It's not anything like the dot-com implosion in 2000. Those are bad, but this is the longest in the trucking industry's history, going on over 2 years of straight recession. So it's creating sort of an impact on carriers big and small. LTL, an entirely different sector of the industry. These are the XPOs, the Old Dominions, the ABFs of the world. They sort of hub and spoke, have numerous customers putting numerous different cargoes in a single truck and moving it around. They also took a hit during this last 2 years, but what you don't see is a tail on these trend lines. So it looks like truckload will sort of come out of things a little better and a little faster than LTL. LTL is oftentimes following other sectors anyway. 3 legs of the stool that prop up the trucking industry: consumer spending, manufacturing, and housing. I'm going to zip through these relatively quickly. When we came out of COVID, everyone got out of their houses for the first time in a year and a half and said, damn, I'm going to go do something fun. Don't worry, damn is a research term. And so they're taking cruises, they're going to movies, they're taking trips. That doesn't do a whole lot for the trucking industry, indirect at best. However, we're now seeing a rebalancing in a good way where goods are starting to pick up. Of course, that's good consumption, goods purchasing, goods movement. So in 25, we're thinking year over year, it could be a 4% increase. Again, this data was calculated pre-tariff, but I'm an optimist that that is going to be a short-term issue for us as a country. So I think 25, maybe 26 will be good years based on consumer spending, which, by the way, is 2/3 of the country's GDP, so it's not inconsequential. Manufacturing, here again, if you look at the dark color, which is 24, and the lighter blue, which is 25, we're expecting to see a turnaround in most commodities and sectors of manufacturing. So that's the good news. And much of that, again, is going to be activity between Canada, US, and Mexico, just based on the data. Housing market took a huge beating the last couple of years, and I'm just going to come right out and blame the Federal Reserve for this. Hopefully they're not on this call. All economists know when you raise the prime borrowing rate, you give it 4 to 6 months to see the impact. Our Federal Reserve in 14 months raised the prime borrowing rate 11 times. Cost of doing everything from eating and breathing to buying houses skyrocketed, and hence sales went down. So we're not building houses and we're not filling them with junk. But fortunately, in late 24, the Feds dropped the interest rate 3 times. I'll think they'll do it again in 25. And I do expect the housing market to turn around again. That's the good news. So the cost to operate a truck, imagine your prices to operate a truck going up when the economy is going down. This is why it was a perfect storm for the industry the last 2 years. It's why it felt as bad as the Great Recession. 21 and 22, nearly double-digit increases in the cost to operate a truck per mile or per hour. So again, it was a challenging 24 months for us. If you take the data, we collect up financial data from a massive number of firms, from single truck owners all the way up to the biggest of the big under confidentiality agreements. If you grab our report, it's the operational cost or trucking report. It breaks it out by sector, fleet size, geography, you name it. But across all these line items here, you'll see almost every single line item going up during our trucking recession, to the point where the 23 data at $2.20 a mile to just operate the truck, and these are variable costs, it's not backroom costs, is the highest in our actually recorded history of data collection. So this data, except for driver wages, which is a good thing, it reduces the driver shortage, helps with driver retention, except for driver wages, these line items increased at a time when we could least afford it. So what happened? Well, people went out of business. Tens of thousands of trucking companies, in fact, went out of business over the last couple of years. And these are people that went out of business exclusively for financial reasons. Marginal carriers with high prices, bad management. They turn off the lights and close the doors when gas goes up, a couple cents a gallon, or diesel, I should say. But what's interesting is, in a bad economy, you start to cut corners on safety as well. So what we saw is FMCSA revoking the operating authority of, again, thousands of carriers just in the last 2 to 3 years. Now, the good news here, if there is such a thing as good news in a bad economy with all these bankruptcies, is when the economy turns, which will happen in 25. Again, I'm a naive optimist. Good companies, safe companies, well-managed companies are going to hit the marketplace with less competition. Shippers, receivers are going to be fighting for the capacity, and pricing will go up. And at the end of the day, when pricing goes up, you have a healthy trucking industry, you have a healthy economy, and equally important, of course, is a safe trucking industry. And so I'm optimistic that 25 is going to see these positive changes, and will turn the corner on what's been a pretty ugly 2-year stretch. With that, I'm not going to take questions now. I'm going to switch over to Sam. Again, Sam is the CEO of Bay&Bay, which is headquartered right here in Eagan, Minnesota. A great company. I'm glad he's joining us today to talk about what it's like to operate a trucking company on a day-to-day basis.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for having me. Thank you, Dan. We'll get the sharing component done here, and we should be good to go. Okay. Well, thanks for everyone who's tuned in. It looks like we've got quite a number of people that have joined us today. Again, Sam Anderson here with Bay&Bay. And I thought I'd just start out with a little introduction of our company. We've our vision for Bay and Bay is that we'll be the premier provider of surface transportation and logistics solutions for commercial shippers in North America. And we made a change back in 2014. We went through a strategic planning session by using an outside facilitator. We had 5 different trucking divisions, all doing different things. And what we wanted to do is figure out what were we going to be 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and try to set a strategic vision for the business. And so we hired a local company named the Prouty Project. They're located over in Edina, in Eden Prairie. And they really helped us boil down what our values are. And this wasn't that we came up and made up our values. We really went through a process to explore what have our values been and what do we want to communicate for employees, vendors, customers, and people that we come in contact with. So out of that, we came up, these have been our values, and these continue to be our values. And I always like to share with folks that the difference between a value and a priority is that priorities change, values don't. So, for example, we have a nice little thing here where we use the word spire, S-P-I-R-E. Most of you might know that a spire is a pointed object pointing upwards on the top of a church or on other buildings. But that really helps us remind our folks. It's an easy way for us to remember what these values are and how we can communicate them. But safety is one of our core values. And I really appreciate what Dan said about how safety is so important out there on our roads. We have hundreds of thousands of people every day, every hour, and unfortunately accidents do happen. And oftentimes it's when people aren't paying attention, or they're not focused on the road, or they may be tired. But these are our values. So it's safety, having a positive attitude, integrity, respect, and excellence. And we want our folks to share these values. And as we've gotten larger, it's been important that we cascade these values across the organization. And sometimes we have folks that maybe show behaviors that aren't showing that they're aligned with our values. And when we see those things, it's a good opportunity for us to get together and just talk about what those values are and how there may be things that conflict with those. And it really helps us continue to be an organization focused on the things that are going to be good for our customers. They're going to be good for our communities, and it's going to be good for our business. Bay and Bay was founded in 1941. The original family that founded Bay and Bay had a variety of different trucking companies, and they were also big into the warehousing in Minnesota. They actually had relationships with a lot of long-term manufacturers and food companies here in the state of Minnesota going back to the late 1800s. One of those companies was Cargill. So we get to share that we've been doing business with Cargill for over 100 years, which is pretty exciting. My family, my parents, started doing the repair work on Bay and Bay's equipment back in 1983. And eventually, one of the original founders of Bay and Bay approached my parents in 1988 and asked them to buy the company. And so they moved forward with that. So in 1988, we got into the trucking business and have just slowly grown the business over time by those core values that I shared earlier. And today, we're still headquartered here in Minnesota. We're uniquely positioned. We've got over 600 drivers. And we've got over 1,300 trailers, and we serve a lot of different segments, but one segment we focus on a lot is the refrigerated market of the supply chain industry. And in addition to that, as we've grown, we have added a logistics function to our business. And that business has grown dramatically in the last 15 years. to over $250 million, which is over twice the size of our trucking operation. So on any given week, we're moving 4,000 to 5,000 loads and serving hundreds of thousands of people, especially with things related to food. Some of the key locations around the country that we send our trucks, you can see that we go to the East Coast. We're heavy in the Midwest. We also do a lot of business down around Texas and over to the Southeast into Atlanta. And then we also have a group of drivers, over 100 of our drivers go from the Midwest out to the west part of Utah and Idaho, and then are oftentimes coming back from the West Coast, bringing things like potatoes and pizza dough and organic milk back into the Midwest and into the Southeast and into Texas. Here are some market insights. I'm going to come back to this in just a second. I'm going to go to the brochure here, which really talks about our modes. So beyond refrigerated trucking, we have the logistics space that has grown. And within that, we're hauling not just full truckloads of refrigerated products, but we also move dry shipments that can be freight of all kinds. It might be air conditioners, it might be windows, it might be office furniture, many, many different things. But we will move a pallet of those products. We will move a full trailer or truckload of those products. And then we also will move things by the railroads. So we are a true IMC, and we move things around the country via the railroads because of these direct contracts with the railroads. And that has really opened up some doors for us with our customers to be more value add, so that when they have different needs, sometimes some of our customers have more flexibility on when their products deliver. So they might have a window of delivering sometime in a 7-day window versus a 1 or 2 or 3 day window. And so when they have a wider window of delivery time, we can oftentimes put that on the railroad, and the service is still very dependable, and it gets there and we can save them some money. So that's been really good. Move through that. Here are some shippers that we do business with. So you can see it's heavily slated towards the refrigerated segment of the market. We do business with Mars and Nestle and McCain and the others that you see here. I like to tell people that we haul a lot of candy bars, butter, and frozen turkeys. Service, as Dan alluded to earlier, with safety being such a valued thing in our industry, service is also something that's a value of the customers that we deal with. And you have to be able to take care of our drivers and make sure that we have late model equipment, which is newer equipment that isn't going to be breaking down quite as often. And so to do that, we don't charge necessarily what we call market rates. Oftentimes we have these different discussions, as Dan showed earlier in his presentation. We have contract rates, and then we have spot rates. And when we get into negotiations in the industry with the shipping community, oftentimes there's the word market rates, and that definition oftentimes includes a large percentage of companies who actually don't make money. And eventually every year there's trucking companies that are going out of business. And what happens is those trucking companies don't understand the cost of what it takes to run a company. And eventually they also don't know what they need to charge if they don't know their costs. And so if they're not charging enough, that's what eventually puts them out of business. However, the rates that they provide to the shipping community are a part of what we call market rates. And so oftentimes, you know, a Bay and Bay or other trucking companies that have been around for 30 or 40 or 60 or 80 plus years, you know, we've learned over time that our service requires a certain level of price. And that oftentimes isn't what you call a market price. It might be higher than a market price. Now, based on our size and based off of the relationships that we've established, both with the railroads and our outside carriers, we have been able to take advantage of our scale, which does give us some advantages with price, so that we can bring and deliver better pricing to the shipping community. But we never lead with price. And I think that's an important distinction, that if you want good service and you want carriers that are going to be safe and reliable, usually that isn't the cheapest carrier or the cheapest price that they might give you. So that's served us well over time, and we're going to continue to have that a part of our culture and our values to really you know, charge fair prices for the service that we deliver. You can see here we've been one of the top 100 carriers for a while now. We're also one of the top 50 brokers in the country, so we're pretty proud of that. And we continue to grow even despite the economic challenges that we've been in here over the last 3 years. Dan described it as a, you know, really a 2 to 3 year recession. We noticed that the recession was starting to take place in April and May of 2022. So that wasn't the deepest part, but that was really, in our opinion, the beginning. And so if you do that math, that really we're coming up on almost 3 years of a freight recession. This has been the longest recession I've ever seen in 30 years. And I'm hoping that things will change. But because it's gone on so long, we are now starting to make changes where we're not being quite as offensive, and we're starting to be a little bit more defensive. So we'll move down here. Again, this is a little bit more our network of where we run our refrigerated equipment. You can see on the map here, we have some stars where we have dedicated operations. So one of the services that we offer our customers is that we will provide dedicated drivers, trucks, and equipment in locations that meet their service expectations. And so we've got 6 current dedicated operations and a 7th here coming on soon in the South and Southeast, and then up here in the Midwest. And that business is nice because our drivers get familiar with the customer's expectations, and then they oftentimes are doing the same thing day in and day out. And that brings a lot of benefit to both the customer and to us as a transportation provider. One thing it does is when a driver is running the same routes every day, they become familiar with their surroundings, and that usually leads to being more safe. They know when to watch out for certain things, what ramps to get on and off of, what buildings or maybe things that might be possibly things that they could have to watch out for so they don't run into, whether it be posts or corners of buildings or different things. So that consistency and that repetitiveness always can help keep the risk profile of those lanes and that dedicated business down to lower levels than we normally see in our other over-the-road business. One last thing that we've started offering in the last 3 years that's led to some growth for us is we actually have a power-only option in our business. And what this means is we actually own the trailers and provide trailers, either dry trailers or refrigerated trailers, to the shipping community. And then we actually will go and find other local small to medium-sized carriers, and they will hook onto our trailers and haul those loads for our customer. Essentially, we become a customer to some of these smaller carriers. And this has been really good because we have what's called OrbCom trailer tracking in all of our trailers. So with that OrbCom technology, we can see where every trailer is all the time, 24/7, and we can relay that information to our customer to give them the updates they need and make it less confusing for the carrier partners that we have to be able to provide the communication from those carriers through us to our customers. So that's been a real positive thing that customers have latched onto, and we look forward to that continuing to grow. I want to be careful of running over here, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to some market insights, and I'll keep this down to just a couple of minutes here. As Dan said, there's been 2 to 3 years of a freight recession. In that time, over 8,000 freight brokers have left the market. 113,000 trucking companies have left the market. And what we're finally starting to see is we're starting to see a glimmer that rates are coming up. But also to Dan's slides, our costs have grown faster than the revenue quality has been able to do that. So because of that, back in December, we took a proactive process, and we went to most of our customers to let them know that we've helped them in the last 2 years, and now we need their help as we go forward, because we can't continue to haul at the current rate levels based on all of the extreme cost increases that we've seen in insurance, and equipment costs, and other things that continue to make trucking a challenging industry. And finally, the future. So I am going to predict that 2025 is going to continue to be a tough year for trucking. I am not paying a lot of attention to the tariffs right now. For those of you that are watching, some of you may be interested in getting into this industry, and I highly encourage you to explore it further. And if you are interested, by all means, reach out to me anytime through email or through our HR department. We'd be happy to field more questions. But the one thing you're going to want to know about working in this industry is that you have to be a problem solver. If you don't like solving problems, or maybe better said, you have to like to do puzzles. And that's one thing that I always enjoy, is that we've got a puzzle actively going on at home. And when we finish the puzzle, we put it away and we get out a new puzzle. Logistics and trucking are like that. Every day we're putting puzzles together, and we're breaking them apart, and we're putting things back together. And that type of environment is demanding. It can be frustrating at times, but it also can be very, very rewarding. So as you're considering that as an option, think about that and feel free to reach out, not just to us, but I know other local companies that are always welcome to hosting people for visits to see more of what it's like to work for a trucking or a logistics business. Further predictions, I think there'll be more trucking companies. There was just a trucking company last week, been around for a long time. They're a refrigerated carrier, one of the top 50 refrigerated carriers in the country, over 250 drivers, and they just closed up the doors. They said we just can't keep doing this. So very unfortunate to see those things. But as we see more of that happening, that oftentimes gets the attention of the shipping community, and the shipping community knows that they can only go so far and so long before they need to be able to raise prices with the good quality companies that they want to do business with long term. So another really important part of a trucking company's business profile is used equipment prices. And so that's something else that has been challenging, and that usually follows suit when we have rates decline. Oftentimes, people are less eager to buy trucks and trailers, used trucks and trailers. And so when you have less buyers, the prices drop for the equipment that is being sold. So we've recently, you know, for our size, we're always selling equipment. And so we have seen a little bit of an improvement recently with some of the trucks and the trailers that we've sold. But we're still getting probably $10,000 to $20,000 less per piece of equipment that we sell than what we normally would get in a just a moderate environment, not a COVID boom market, and not a freight recession like this. So that's a lot of money when you're selling hundreds of pieces of equipment. But we have to continue to buy new equipment and replace out the old. And so some of these things you have to balance as you continue to manage our business. So I think by 2026, we will see a rebound, and the capacity imbalance will come back into play. And as Dan said earlier, I think shippers will have realized that prices are going up by then. And it's likely that many people will be talking about a driver shortage again. And so with that said, I'll turn it back over to Gina and let Gina manage the questions. Thank you all for attending today.
Great. Well, thank you both, Sam and Dan, for your presentations. I already know I learned a lot, and I'm glad to hear that my candy is in good hands, Sam. So thank you very much for that. I've got a couple questions, and at this time, I'm going to remind folks on the webinar to please put your questions into the Q&A. And there's one that we have. Dan, maybe if you want to answer this one, but can you give a formal definition of truckload versus LTL carrier?
Sure. So I think the simplest way to envision that difference is a shipper or a customer is essentially, quote unquote, buying the capacity of an entire trailer. Sam hit it on the head. They may only put one pallet in there. They may fill it to the brim, but they're in control of all 53 feet of the trailer. When you look at LTL, again, like a FedEx Freight, they're going to take a truck in Minneapolis. They're going to drive to 20 different destinations, pick up 20 different customer items, pallets, you name it, head back to Roseville where they have a big terminal, reconfigure it to a truck that's going to Denver, a truck that's going to Chicago. And so it's less than truckload. The customer is buying less than a truckload, and their goods are more destined to a location than, say, a 3M locking up a trailer and saying, okay, I need this Scotch tape to go here and these Post-it notes to go there. 3M is still in control of the whole truckload versus LTL where you're just buying some capacity. That's just the simplest way.
Great.
You know, Gina, I'm guessing you have more questions. I'm going to say 4 things in 20 seconds, very editorial, but I promise it's based exclusively on data and research. People are asking about battery electric trucks. Not happening for many years. A Class 8 battery electric truck, 450,000. In cold weather, I lose 40% of the battery capacity. I can't afford to buy one, let alone insure one. I'm going to have to insure Sam today buys one for 170,000. Now he has to insure a 450,000 battery electric truck. The math isn't there today. The customers aren't willing to pay more. Autonomous trucks, active safety systems are the way of the world. But level 4 and level 5, the idea I'm going to drive an 80,000 pound truck down the freeway without a human in it, not happening while I'm breathing oxygen, to be honest. Couldn't afford the insurance, and the trial lawyers will be all over that like flies on honey. Platooning is dead. Minnesota passed a number of legislative sessions ago a platooning law to make it quote unquote easier to platoon. There's just no interest. FedEx isn't going to platoon with UPS. You can't platoon hazmat. You can't platoon in urban settings. You can't platoon in the grade going into Denver. 10,000 reasons why I'm just not going to platoon. And then the last thing is poor Sam pays an extra 12% for every truck and trailer because of a federal excise tax, which was started in World War I to fund the war. We're still paying 12% more for every single truck out there, and that includes every safety system that's installed on the truck. So we're releasing research in about a month that's looking at what would be the impact of eliminating or repealing the federal excise tax on trucks to see what the safety and even environmental benefits would be. So I'm going to shut up now.
Okay, so you've talked about technologies you don't think are going to work, or at least anytime soon. So I'd like both of you to maybe comment on how has technology, what are some of the current and emerging technologies that have helped advance trucking in, in Minnesota and across the country? And Sam, I'm going to start with you, and then Dan, you can jump in.
Sure. Well, I'm sure everyone is hearing about AI and how AI is going to, really it's like the next thing closest to when the internet was invented. And I really do believe that AI is going to make a major impact on our lives as we go forward. Today, one of the things that I think is most important to be effective in using AI is you have to have a command of your information. If you have a command of your information, you can then use AI to help you deliver that information in a way that can be useful for others, whether that's internally, whether that's externally, whether that's you sell that information. There are businesses now, and of course you have to have permission from your customers, but they are selling information. You look at credit card companies. They are taking that information and they are using the buying habits. And of course, they're anonymizing those buying habits. They're not saying it's, Sam bought this or Gina bought that, but, they show patterns, and then they can sell those patterns to people who then have to make predictions and decisions on various things. So one thing that we're using, and this is both in our trucking and logistics, every day our customers have certain shipments that they didn't plan for. One of their customers calls them and says, "Hey, I need more pizza dough," or "I need another load of milk." And so, and it's going to go to a place that they've never gone before. It's a new customer, and so those are called spot loads. And so that customer of ours will send out an email or some sort of electronic communication letting us and maybe others, it might be 5 other providers, it might be 100, and then they want to get a response back quickly so that they can respond back to their customer. Well, we have a software that we're using that now allows us to harness all of those requests, the inbound requests, and that software is hooked to a proprietary algorithm that we have with internal pricing and external pricing sources, and we can respond back within minutes of that request. And we can make the quotes that we give back tied to more real time versus us trying to guess, okay, what's it going to cost, 3 days from now? And so we've seen about a fifth for spot quoting, just all the spot quoting that we do, we've seen about a 15% increase in the number of loads that we get tendered from our customers just in the last 18 months. That's a pretty big jump, to grow just that part of our business by 15%. And it's really what it's also doing is, before we had 26 to 30 people all trying to do that activity on their own, and they're all having to use some of our systems, but they're also having to use kind of their gut intuition to put a price on things. So we've got more consistent with our pricing, and we've also been able to take out some of the labor cost that is involved with doing all those manual tasks.
Great. Thank you. Dan?
I'd only add, I like active safety systems. We have a research contract with FMCSA to study things like lane centering assist, automated emergency braking. Some of those technologies are not liked by the drivers at all, in fact, but many times it's because the drivers don't understand how they work. So our research with FMCSA is to figure out why we have these in all our cars and love them, but we barely have them in the trucking industry. And what does it take to get them in the industry? And so we're working very closely with OIDA, which is a large truck driver organization, to figure out what education tools are needed. And I completely agree with Sam about AI. But by the way, AI can also be used against the trucking industry. So there's a lot of look-sees and research underway with trying to figure out how cyber is being used against the trucking industry. Cargo theft and fraud is rampant. So I think we have to step lightly and figure out where it works well and where we need to be more cautious.
Great, thank you. So here was a question in the Q&A. Where do you see the trucking movement changing in the urban core, with the curb being used for other uses like bike lanes, less parking spaces? And, are trucking companies exploring, integrating things like cargo bikes or other forms of smaller freight carriers?
Sam, do you want to go first or do you want me to?
Sure, sure. I would say that undoubtedly, as we see these bike lanes and other things continue to grow in communities, especially in the urban areas, we're going to have to continue to have smaller vehicles being able to navigate. A lot of these roadways now, you cannot get a 53-footer, you cannot get a 48-footer, and you can't even get a 23-foot pup. So what it's going to lead to is it's going to lead to having to go to straight trucks. And I know that there's a couple of local nice companies here locally that are in that business, and they've been growing. And I think that's if any of the people who are listening to this are looking to go into business for themselves at some point, I would definitely point to that as an opportunity in the future that's going to continue to grow.
I would add, first of all, if you think you're getting free shipping, there is no such thing. And so your free shipping is going to get more and more expensive as we fight for curb space. We just finished the truck parking study for New York City. And I think the competition and the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard folks, even if, they don't allow 53-foot trailers in Manhattan, they don't want any trucks. So, if you really think your refrigerator is going to get delivered on a bike, sorry to be cynical, we have to figure this out. And it's not going to be drones. FedEx has moved away from drones. So we have a lot of work in this regard because we want our goods, not tomorrow morning, but this afternoon. We just don't want the trucks in our front yard. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's all going to get a little bit more expensive as we, wend our way around those problems.
All right, well, I have one final question that I wanted to ask both of you. So for the most part, you're operating your private vehicles on, for the most part, public infrastructure. There's obviously some private infrastructure. So I'm curious from your perspective, each of you, and Dan, if you want to go national, but Sam, and obviously you also operate on roads outside of Minnesota, but what are one or two things that that the public sector or government can do to help support your operations and the health and viability of the trucking industry?
Well, I have one quick one.
Go ahead.
I would just say truck parking. Truck parking is something that we're very short of across the nation. Our drivers are oftentimes in their trucks for weeks on end, and they are having to pull over oftentimes an hour to 3 hours before they normally would stop working just to find a place to park. And it seems like the attitude, when we had COVID happen, everybody was thanking our drivers. And I had a gut feeling it wasn't going to last. And we've seen it now. People are back to not appreciating the driver. They don't really care about the driver. They're getting their stuff on time. And that's an unfortunate thing. But these people deserve to have places that are safe, that have, good showers and good amenities. And that's something that we owe to these people, to continue to have, things that get delivered on time and come to our grocery stores on a daily basis.
So I know this is being recorded, but I'm going to say on the record, please, please, please raise the diesel and gasoline taxes committed to the roads, and move away from these VMT and mileage-based user fees where you're going to charge me, every foot to move. The bottom line is the federal government spends 0.2 cents for every dollar collected on administering the federal fuel tax. State of Minnesota spends between 2 to 3 cents on the dollar to administer the Minnesota state fuel tax. And almost every MBUF VMT system, where you're going to have a little dongle in every vehicle in the country, the estimated administrative costs for those are somewhere between 15 and 40%. So if you want efficiency, particularly in pavement, raise the fuel taxes and put it back into pavement, but stop chasing these strange little tax widgets. Sorry, I just had to get off my soapbox for a minute.
Well, I would expect nothing less, Dan. So thank you both. So everybody, please join me in thanking Sam and Dan. It's obviously you can't see them, but I know that it was a great conversation. Oh, there goes one. So thank you so much for the conversation and the presentations. And again, as I mentioned, the information will be posted on the CTS website if you'd like to go, and the webinar as well if you want to go back and view it. We've had a lot of folks take a look at the webinars if they weren't able to join during the time we had it offered. So I know this one will be similar as well, and folks wanting to learn a little bit more. So with that, thank you so much, Sam and Dan. Great presentations. Really learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. So thanks, everyone, and have a safe and great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Take care.